Good evening, gentlemen. I've gathered together a meeting of some of the great geniuses of the Doctor Who fan community. And me. Paul Morris, Big Finish writer, missing episodes expert. Welcome.
How are you?
Giles Sparrow, renowned astrophysics author and quiz show protagonist. Hello.
Hey up.
And Gav Rymel, Dalek prop chronicler, forensic researcher and 3D set modeller. All well?
Why, aye.
The talents of these geniuses should be harnessed to a superior vision. With their help, I could turn this insignificant planet into a power base unique in the universe. Or we could just make a podcast.
Look, can we just dispense with these phony northeast accents?
But we're aiming for maximum authenticity for our celebration of Doctor Who's forays into the Industrial Revolution.
Really?
Look, everyone knows there are only 3 English accents in Doctor Who. There's received pronunciation, Mummersat, or up north. And this one is definitely up north.
So come here, lad. Run to tavern. Tell them as wants a podcast to listen right now. I could do that worse if you want.
No, I think that's unbeatable, to be honest. Hello, and welcome to Something Who Podcast, episode 40. I'm Richard, and we're back with another look at a pair of Doctor Who stories, this time with something of an Industrial Revolution theme. First up is 6th Doctor story, Mark of the Rani, and then we'll have a look at 11th Doctor outing, The Crimson Horror. And I've already introduced the rest of the team in our sketch, so I guess it's time to get down to it. So, good evening, gentlemen.
Hello.
Evening.
Good evening, host.
So, may as well kick off with Mark of the Rani by Pip and Jane Baker, which was directed by Sarah Hellings, with music by Jonathan Gibbs. It's from season 22. And I have to say, the first thought when I started watching this was, could these titles be any more 80s? I think they're the 80s-ist titles of the lot.
Aren't they? Yeah. Have we not discussed them before?
I don't think we've watched anything from this season yet.
I remember watching Twin Dilemma for the first time when they appear. And in common with the strange decision to put a brand new Doctor at the end of a season rather than wait. I remember thinking, as a teenager, they've hurriedly put on a new effect onto the titles just for this one story, just to make it look different. I don't think that much of that. So at least I'll have time to do it properly when it comes back. I just thought it was and I genuinely thought it was a one-off, and I was astonished that they stuck with it. But anyway, yes, very 80s, isn't it?
Yeah. So let me take you back in time. So it's the 2nd and the 9th of February 1985.
Good Lord. And
the National Union of Mine Workers is in the middle of a strike. So between March 1984 and March 1985, for a whole year, the mine workers were on strike, and this aired just right towards the end of that. So I mean, I don't know how much that was in the thinking of Pip and Jane Baker when they wrote it. It depends whether they wrote it in sort of late 84 or whether they were already going by then. And the other aspect of my meagre research is that Killingworth is a real place, and Ravensworth was indeed Stevenson's employer.
Ooh.
Ah.
He wasn't Lord Ravensworth until, I think, 1821, which must put it 1822-ish.
Either that or Pip and Jane are sort of slightly off the mark.
I'm just gobsmacked at you saying that this aired the 2nd and 9th of February, because exactly 1 month before this, I was at Queen Elizabeth Country Park with my friend Tim Wearing, watching them filming bits of Revelation.
Oh, right.
And I'm thinking, seems like such a fast turnaround that they were...
Yeah.
They started airing the season and they were still filming, they were doing location filming for Revelation. But maybe that's just in terms of these days where we got used to so much longer lead times.
Yeah. So following on the historical theme, I discovered that Stevenson and Humphrey Davy were actually at loggerheads. So they wouldn't really have been speaking because they both simultaneously invented the miner's lamp. And essentially Humphrey Davy accused Stevenson of having ripped it off because as a commoner he couldn't possibly have had the intelligence to invent it. Whereas, of course, Davy was a gentleman, and thus sort of felt that invention was his domain. And Michael Faraday was Humphrey Davy's assistant. So again, I mean, I'm not saying that there couldn't have been a meeting between Faraday, Davy, and Stevenson, but it feels like it would have been pretty tense.
Interesting.
Yes.
I have been to the wherever this was filmed. It would be good if I could remember.
Bliss Hill?
That's right. Yeah. So yeah, my wife worked for a year in Shropshire, so I sort of headed over in that direction at weekends, and we went down there once.
I thought you were going to say she ran a bathhouse at Bliss Hill.
Well, I mean, that would have been more exciting, wouldn't it? So we know it's being filmed in a theme park, but it does feel a bit like it's being filmed in a theme park. I don't know what the experience of being a mine worker was, and certainly it's a pit village, I suppose, rather than in the middle of a town. But I don't know. It's bloody hard work being a miner, and it just feels a little bit too much like a picnic at times.
Strange, isn't it? What do you think that is? I always remember Julia Smith, producer of EastEnders, went on a field trip to Granada Studios when she was setting up EastEnders and had a look around the sets for Sherlock Holmes and Coronation Street, and came back with the conclusion that they didn't look real because they weren't dirty enough. There was no litter, no muck, no grime, no soot, no weeds, and that's what she encouraged the set designers of EastEnders to fill it with. And which isn't. I mention that because that isn't the case here. It's not that it's not dirty enough. There's enough muck all over people's faces and clothes.
Yeah.
At times I wonder if it's a bit overdone, though. Does it look like it's peasant chic at times? The elegantly distressed fabrics all over the show.
Everything's very uniformly scruffy. It's funny, Richard, saying about the sort of feel and believability of it. It never feels like a genuine community, I don't think. And it has that same sort of feel as Mask and Mandragora are filmed in Port Merion. I mean, they do very well to try and frame things nicely, but you never get any sense that it's a real functioning village. And I don't know whether, like you say, it's a pit village. It's not a village in the conventional sense, as far as I know. But yeah, there's a feeling of a lack of authenticity to it, strangely.
Is Bliss Hill completely recreational? Or is it adapted from genuine original mining
I think
structures?
It was an original location, an original
Right.
functioning place. I meant to look up where Pip and Jane envisaged it being shot, because they wrote it specifically for a similar working museum type location in South Wales, and it was Sarah Hellings who switched it to Bliss Hill, and Bliss Hill didn't have some of the functioning items in Pip and Jane's script, like I think it was a switching track and overhead trucks or something like that. Right. So Eric Saywood had to restructure some of the material to refit it to Bliss Hill.
I know the crew had to spend a lot of time setting up their own miniature gauge railway for the scene with Colin going for
Oh, crumbs, do they?
Apparently.
Right.
Which is strange because it does have the feel sometimes of a story that's been written to a shopping list of features that were available on the location. So it's ironic that it was, and then they had to recreate them all in a completely different location. That's kind of the worst of both worlds.
Yeah, I had the same response. My first note on this was really, especially based on the first 5 minutes, well, it's all a bit television for schools, isn't it? It kind of looks like some of those things that we would be...
How we used to live.
Yes, exactly. Something you'd all be shuttled into the assembly room for, and they'd wheel out the telly and you'd watch that for half an hour.
It's a shame. I feel really churlish picking on that because, of course, it is a much richer looking location than we normally get.
Yeah,
and it is
absolutely.
Much more
Yes,
authentic.
yeah.
It's not studio bound, and it's not a hurriedly redressed exterior location that has no authentic features. So it feels churlish, and yet we're just saying what we can feel it, can't we? We pick up on it straight away, and there's some of that French and Saunders House of Idiots style feel with the extras walking past, pushing their equipment.
There's one child that runs directly past the main characters and then just stops by a fence and stands and turns around and just looks. It's like it's an android just programmed to run back and forth along the same bit of street.
Oh no, there's a much better story.
Westworld.
Wow. Oh no, stop it.
Yeah.
I think the issue is it feels conspicuously used, the setting. You very much feel in the cinematography. Look what we've got. And I think they kind of overplay their hand a bit. Yeah, it's nice and it's expansive, but it draws your attention to it so much that it sort of invites a little too much scrutiny. But then, like you say, they can't win, because if it's impressive, it makes the audience ask, how was this accomplished? Where was this shot? And if it's not very good, then people say, well, they couldn't get a real Victorian village. So yeah, it's churlish. You're right. We're bad people.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I guess I wish I had perhaps been a bit less nitpicky to kick things off, because I have to say, I found it a pretty entertaining story. I mean, I purposely picked one that was a bit shorter this time than the last time. I mean, we put ourselves through the ringer a bit with Ambassadors, although, again, a story that I love. And Mark of the Rani, I think, it's one of the ones from Collins' era that's quite accessible. And it went along at a nice pace. So, I quite enjoyed it, but it's one of those ones that in the end I couldn't help nitpicking here and there, just because there are a few nits to pick, I suppose.
I think it starts strongly,
yeah,
and then gets into trouble. I think the first episode works really well, and there's lots of setup and intrigue. Although I found the Doctor's interest in the situation was strangely over-enthusiastically.
Yeah, he seemed to understand that he was going into an adventure and he should be looking out for clues a bit. He starts talking about the cause of the attack. He doesn't really think they're real Luddites, even at the initially. And I don't know that there was anything that was obviously giving that away.
Yeah, there were Luddites acting normally for Luddites and a red dot. And he jumped to the conclusion there was some extraordinary mystery to unwrap. It's sort of the inversion of the slow to catch on trope of when normally your protagonist is tripping over clues.
Isn't that set up though that they are drawn off course from heading for
That's
Q,
true.
as we know?
Yeah.
So there's some justification in the fact that he might be looking out for time meddler-ish shenanigans. So I suppose it's understandable. Although who does the drawing of course? Is that the Master?
Yes.
With his
Spare me the dubious pragmatism, Giles.
Damn, we didn't get the klaxon.
I think the function of the Master in the story feels... You mentioned a shopping list type story before, and I think does come to that at times. And the Master not having any particular role, the fact that he was a request on the shopping list, I think feels obvious at times. But also, him and the Rani provides the episode's best bits, I think. Their meeting is excellent and believable.
Yeah.
And villains not being just pointlessly villainous is always good.
Their two-way sparring and later the three-way sparring with the Doctor is definitely the best bit. And it's difficult to really imagine what it would have been like if there was a version without the Master. Because the Rani doesn't get a lot to do. You may think he's badly served just skulking around in the shadows for three-quarters of the story, but she's mostly confined to her bathhouse, flicking switches for most of it. So it's difficult to imagine that there was a version of the story with only one character doing all of that. I don't know what Anthony and Amy thought, but I think they do both come out of it reasonably well.
Because as I understand it from reading the production notes while I was watching it, so my understanding is that the Rani was initially, the idea was they were going to give the Master a companion in the same sense as the Doctor has one all the time. And then when they came up with the idea of casting Kate O'Mara, they got the idea that no, let's make her an independent agent, have a female time lady who is a renegade. So it's funny that in that regard, in terms of the structure, it's kind of funny that they then did that and then kept the Master in, because you'd almost think, okay, why not give her her own run?
To play devil's advocate, and this obviously isn't deliberate, but he's so one-dimensional in this that it does make her seem like a much more three-dimensional character by contrast. And they don't try and hide that. They realise that and flag it up in the writing. They hang a lampshade on it, as the kids call it, where the Rani points out how asinine and moustache twirling he is, and his overcomplicated plans, which she delights in pointing out to him.
And he has no plan in this. He draws the TARDIS off course, and then
and then
what? He's standing around in a field dressed as a scarecrow, trying to think of a way to eventually kill the Doctor. And weirdly, both he and the Doctor stumble across the Rani, who was already there minding her own business, as she apparently has been all through human history, which is quite interesting. And it's kind of fun that the Master's sort of second fiddle, but it's also really awkward, and it really diminishes his character, that he's at a loose end. He's just kind of going to the petrol station to buy some raw plugs and bumps into the Doctor on the way and tries to decide to kill him. I don't know, it's all really weird.
The whole thing seems rather meandering to me. One of those circular plots where it just seems once we've established a location, everybody just seems to be wandering around, occasionally bumping into each other. That's just how it feels. Yeah, the Master is the epitome of that.
I was going to say that and Gav mentioned a little bit, was that the episode 1, it seemed to me, was about the best episode 1 that we got in this particular season, because we've got this new structure of 45-minute episodes, and it feels like a lot of that Colin Baker season, episode 1, 45 minutes long, serves the purpose of a typical 25-minute episode 1. And then you've got episodes 2, 3, 4 squeezed into the second 45 minutes, which makes the first one seem kind of slow and padding and the last bit seem a bit rushed. Whereas this one, it feels like the balance is much better, and the cliffhanger in the middle is kind of in the right place. And there is 2 episodes worth of content in the first 45 minutes.
I agree. I think it is one of the best uses of that format, and yet I also think that the format hobbles this slightly and means it's not as effective as it would have been. I don't think anyone ever completely got their head around how to pace something, a 45-minute episode that doesn't tell a complete story. But there you go.
And then episode 2, I think, is where it really runs into trouble, because it just runs out of plot. And again, I think that's when the shopping list kicks in again, because they had double the filming allocation. So one of the requirements was just set a load of stuff outside. And so the bit with Redfern Dell comes out of nowhere as just this sort of contrived non sequitur. The Rani just wanders out, starts laying landmines, and at that point there is no plot. Things are just happening. People are just drifting around, and then it reaches a low point when the pantomime trees arrive. I mean, if the minefield had been to guard something, like the Rani's TARDIS was parked in the forest and she didn't want anyone getting to it or something, if there'd been a function for that, but the fact that the plot just says everyone has to go and all converge on the Dell, and then it gets really kind of stagey and strange.
I think the best line is, "Don't move, Perry, the tree won't hurt you." Also, I feel like that tree is the creature from the Pit Village.
No, that tree reminds me of Asterix and the Big Fights, where the Roman has to go and the Roman spy has to go and hide in the tree and gets followed around by an owl, and is getting progressively exasperated while looking at it and being menaced by this owl. But talking of the aimlessness, I mean, in terms of skipping to the end, I mean, that does kind of hit the nail on the head. To me, it kind of stops, but it doesn't reach a climax. There's no, that's the very odd thing about it, that there's plenty of faffing around, and then the Master and the Rani beat a retreat into the Rani's TARDIS. They're catapulted off because the Doctor sabotaged it, which is all fair enough, but there's no sense of their scheme reaching a culmination or anything particularly.
I'm going to have to ask for your help again here. So sorry about this. I kind of lost track of whose plan was whose. Now, I got the impression, obviously, the Rani had a plan, and the Master turned up, as was pointed out, without one and decided trying to hijack hers. But I kind of got lost in the confusion of whose was whose. What was the Rani's original plan? She was collecting the brain fluid.
Yes.
And what was she going to do with it?
Take it home.
Take it home. To Myosimiagoria. Goria. Because apparently
So she just came to Earth for no particular reason to...
No, it's the only place in the universe with the right brain fluid.
Of course,
thank God for that.
Yes. And it's the Master, right, so side note here, it's the Master who wants to take advantage of the gathering of intellectuals.
Yes.
And take them off somewhere and use them for his nefarious purposes to take over the universe.
So that's interesting, isn't it? Because it's a Pip and Jane Baker trope, one might say, isn't it?
So that's the plot of Time and the Rani.
Yeah. The Rani then nicks his plan and does it in Time and the Rani herself. Yeah.
Well, I was about to criticise Pip and Jane for reusing the same idea, and then I thought, well, I suppose if they'd actually thought of linking it, is it there in the subtext that this is where she thinks of that, or is it just or are they just ripping themselves off?
No,
yeah, let's be charitable and take that interpretation.
Yeah.
The Master gives her his great idea.
I mean, the Master doesn't have that plan at the outset, does he? He formulates it halfway through. But actually, doesn't he say he's going to kill George Stevenson rather than do anything useful?
Well, that would be the King's Demons version of the Master, who is a poor man's time meddler and just wants to turn up at minor points in British history and bugger things up a bit.
Yeah, I mean, the other problem with this geniuses thing is I'm not sure that they are. In that, I mean, George Stevenson is a really good engineer. There's no question about it. Humphrey Davy was a great gentleman, but I think, to be honest, a lot of his career was behind him by this period. Michael Faraday perhaps is
Faraday's where the action is.
The greatest claim, but yeah, and they only mentioned those three, but there's 20 others. I don't know who the other 17 are that make up this collection of great geniuses, but they seem to have sort of run out of people to talk about once they got to those.
It's quite interesting to imagine them in light of where pop culture has gone in the however many 40 odd years it is since this aired.
Yeah.
Now it's quite intriguing to imagine the Master's steampunk empire that he would have forged with using these geniuses. Presumably it would have all been airships a go-go.
Yeah.
It's strange. I always start this story thinking it's going to be about this meeting of great minds and the Master's attempt to sabotage it. And I always forget that not only does that meeting not actually happen, we only meet one of the people of the great minds, and it isn't the Master's plan. And it's really odd. It's really odd.
And that one person doesn't contribute anything of his genius to the plot in any way.
No.
So while I always hate to criticise a story for not being something, for what it isn't, it really does seem like it's more than a missed opportunity to not use Stevenson in some way, or steam, or rockets, or genius. But none of it. He's ultimately just window dressing like as much as H.G. Well, he's not as bad as H.G. Wells. It's in the same line. It's not a celebrity historical that's in any way. It's not only not built around him,
because it's also a waste of Gordon Granger, who's terrific, and he turns up and he is rather. I thought, he's rather good, isn't he? And he's there's an energy to his performance that's kind of matching Collins, and you think, this is good. They're going to bounce off each other, and we're going to have quite a bit of them sparking off each other. And then no, he has to go off and just be another part, moving around and doing I don't quite know what really most of the time.
I mean, I still prefer it to that Tesla episode from the other year, but on balance. But at least that had some electricity in it. This scene doesn't even have any steam in it. It's just
Stevenson
strange.
should have invented a steam gun to detonate the tree mines or something to prove himself useful. Or the tree mines could have belched steam and prompted him to invent the steam engine. I don't know.
One thing there is a lot of extraneous detail on botany and the plant life of the northeast, which I can only see in Pip and Jane Ramett are gardeners, but there's far more in there than there needs to be. Oh, possibly also they were trying to give Perry something to do.
Exactly. At least they remember that Perry is supposedly a botanist. They're the only people that.
That's one thing they were quite good at. They used to read the character descriptions, didn't they? And, which is more than half the writers did.
Yeah.
The other thing that's nice is they do actually nail a quite nice relationship between the Doctor and Perry, and it's not as antagonistic as a lot of the rest of this series. And you feel these are people who could spend time with each other.
I need to be reminded of that because I think if you watch it in context, that's very obvious. But watching it out of context, I was still thinking that, oh my God, why are you writing them like that? But yes, I mean definitely as Richard said, it's more accessible than most of the other stories this season. It seems strange to think that an accessible story is one which has 3 Time Lords discussing Gallifreyan history, but that's the 80s for you.
Yeah.
Generally, I'm entrenched in the 1960s, so I haven't watched an 80s episode for a good few months. And it is startling how unkind he is to her throughout the episode, and just picking her up on her vocabulary and making fun of her accent and just making her out as useless. And then when there's the bit at the end where he says, "What do you two do in there?" and he says, "Argue mainly." And you think, well, this is a really dysfunctional relationship. She clearly hates it. What is she doing there? Why doesn't she just, I don't know, bail out, go home?
Well, it's ironic. So you two have just completely had exactly the opposite reaction to what I had, which is basically my recollection.
Yep, sorry.
So clearly, no, it's fine. It's just interesting that clearly my recollection of season 22, which I have to say I shy so far away from when I can. My recollection of season 22 is clearly that it's like it's constantly like the twin dilemma for 13 weeks or whatever. So when I see something like Time and Rani, I think, oh, aren't they getting on nicely compared to how I imagined?
I agree. I just think that the rest of it's worse. So
that's how they get you. When they're horrible all the time, when they're slightly less horrible to you, you think, oh, they're being really nice.
Yeah,
I might have to bail on Attack of the Cybermen. I don't think I can cope with ever watching.
Yeah.
So do you think it's Stockholm Syndrome, Giles? I mean, there is a moment when old Sixie's down by the canal or wherever it is. He starts patting children on the head, going on about Perry's pretty dress and her peripheral vision, and I just feel like she's going to push him in. Surely she's going to push him in. He deserves to be pushed in, but somehow she manages to withstand that, and she's a bigger person for it.
A sentiment I'd reciprocate.
I mean, one has to perhaps discuss the accents. They really are very game. They really give it a cracking good go at doing Geordie accents, but it is a bloomin' hard accent. I mean, it's much harder, I think, than South Wales in the Green Death, which they probably make an equal hash of in that. But yeah, they go at it with great gusto, but unfortunately, particularly Kate O'Mara, it wasn't one of the ones that they got in their elocution lessons in RADA or wherever they came from.
Yeah, I don't know. Obviously, I'm not qualified to say whether it's accurate or not, but it does sound weird, doesn't it? The latest in my series of random recollections of what I was watching earlier this evening. I was watching Last Towing in Halifax this evening, which is set up north.
Oh, yes.
And I was just, just when I was thinking maybe perhaps it's my fault, my ears aren't attuned to the many wonderful accents we have up near Hadrian's Wall. But no, Last Towing in Halifax was perfectly natural, which of course it is. And this sounds like the cast of Grange Hill being asked to do Byker Grove.
There's a strange quality to the performances that makes it worse, is that they're not just doing the accent, but they're really overdoing it. And when that guy says "hold hard," mocking the master, I mean, it's really uncomfortable.
Hold hard.
Yeah, it's
hold hard. It's
a strong choice.
Well, you've got a lot of things that RADA actors aren't really, as you said, trained for. They're trying to be working class. They're trying to be butch and masculine, and they're trying to be Geordie. And when you're failing on all three of those,
until Rani puts them in those nice gilets for the vestless.
So considering what feels like half the story is the Luddites running around, and they're the bits that make my teeth itch.
Well, this is the thing that you have the Master and the Rani, and then they just mostly hang around and bicker with each other, and instead of doing anything active, most of that is left to the assorted Geordies or assorted faux Geordies, isn't it? I think that's why it feels a bit energyless.
Part of the problem comes from the fact that there's a strange kind of, not a lack of threat, but the worry about what the Rani's up to is somewhat undermined by the fact she says she's been doing it all through history. So once it's been established that this is her normal pattern, and that she was hanging around during the Mythmakers and might have been in the background of William Hartnell's scenes.
Oh yes, and
it's you kind of think, okay, so that she's part of the tapestry of history, and we can now blame the Luddite riots on her, just as we blame the Trojan Wars on her. So should she be stopped? It's like the meddling monk comments about Stonehenge. It got built because of him. So if you went back in time and came across him at Stonehenge, you wouldn't be obliged to stop him. Yeah, it's kind of weird. It's a sort of impotent threat, if that's not a contradiction in terms.
That's why it's one of my least favourite tropes in Doctor Who, the idea It tends to be new writers, non-science fiction-y people who think, "Oh, I know what I know. It's a program about time travel. I'll have my villain having been responsible for every important." And as you say, it just leads you up a narrative.
New writers like
I'm
Stephen
turning
Moffat
into Pip
in
and
The
Jane.
Impossible Astronaut. That's-
I suppose that it's the combination of her villainous scheme, if not being harmless, can probably be allowed to continue, and the Master not having a villainous scheme, and between them they're just kind of meandering through this story, and then they leave, and it's just
You're
it's
saying that it's
peculiar
the
structure.
Doctor is the one that makes it all worse when he turns up. It would have been fine if he hadn't.
I rather like Terence Alexander in this. I mean, I think he's
Charlie Hungerford.
Indeed, he's not handicapped by trying to put on a Geordie accent.
Jim.
He just kind of plays it as himself, I guess. But he's got a nice big part, and he's quite sympathetic, and he kind of,
It's those Regency trousers. You can't disguise it, can you?
I mean, he's another person who doesn't seem to have an awful lot to do, but at least he has a nice time doing it.
Yes, he holds it together.
Yeah.
And I think you were talking about the overacting of the. I mean, part of the problem also is that Pip and Jane put this thee and thou stuff in there, which I'm sure is entirely pure and accurate, but it just feels kind of awkward when they're having. It's not the sort of language or dialogue the actors are used to, and they don't quite know what to do with it, I think.
There's always a back and forth on that, isn't there? Throughout the entire history of the programme, there's the question of how people speak in historical stories, and nowadays they've completely abandoned any attempt to try and make it authentic. They just speak like modern people, so that we can actually relax and identify with them, so there's not this artificial barrier. But it was always on and off, wasn't it? I mean, there's stories like the Mythmakers back in the 60s where people spoke like real people.
Yeah.
And I tend to think they're the better for it, but it depends what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, well, I guess with the Mythmakers, I mean, you can't have them speaking Greek, can you?
No.
But if they're going to speak English, then I suppose they might as well speak English you can understand than English you can't understand.
That gives the Mythmakers the impression of being very Douglas Adamsy in its way, doesn't it? I've always had that impression, because people in history times talking in that sort of way. But I know it's a difficult balancing act. I mean, I remember the thing with Ripper Street when they wanted to sort of have a sense of distancing on that. I think the screenwriters so they ended up writing a lot of it in iambic pentameter. So going in terms of the rhythms of the language, because they kind of going to Victorian stuff was not, sort of they looked at Victorian speech patterns as best they could and concluded, no, this isn't odd enough and this isn't distanced enough. And so they kind of went full Shakespearean for it, which is odd and anachronistic, but yeah.
I think on some level our brains are wired through a lifetime of familiarity with Shakespeare to think that makes something because something yet the edge of semi-classical authenticity.
Like Silverman.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, that's a prime example.
The other, I was going to introduce this by saying hold hard, but it's too late. The other thing that you have to remember when you're looking at this through a lens is brass.
Oh,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah, which had been on. I mean, we've got Gary Cady, who actually turns up in this episode, and then James Saxon turns up as Oscar in The Two Doctors next week. And we don't get Timothy West, do we? But yeah, and considering Brass had apparently started in 1983, I'm reliably informed by IMDb, and considering how much that was mercilessly sending up the tropes of there's been an accident down pit with
what? Yeah,
Jeffrey Hinsliff getting progressively more maimed from week to week. And, it added another level of this being rather hard to take entirely seriously, at least for me, because I was a big Brass fan.
Is it a unique story in that the title is mentioned twice in the dialogue? I mean, we have the odd one where it comes up, once. But yeah, both in the first and the second episode, somebody pauses and looks at the red blotch and goes, "The mark of the Rani."
Right. I'd have probably noticed that if I watched them on the same day. Is that because they knew they had to put that in, identified a couple of potential candidates, and then left them both there by mistake? Yes, it is. That's why it was. I asked them earlier.
I think you have to qualify the story title more specifically in terms of its structure, because there's plenty of, robot. I'm sure they say robot a lot in robot, terminus a lot in terminus, and kinder a lot in kinder. But certainly the more florid titles, like the Talons of Weng Chang, which, when they get dropped in, resonate.
Without getting ahead of ourselves, but I mean, Gatiss has a lot of fun with that in the next one, doesn't he?
Yes.
Very self-consciously. Was this the story that was originally called Too Clever by Half? Or is that... I know that's a Pip and Jane title. Right.
Apparently so.
That's very them, isn't it? And Mark of the Rani sounds like Saywood to me. So, perhaps he put them both in and forgot to take them out.
Is that it? Have we got more?
I've got loads more Pip and Jane quotes that I haven't been able to crowbar in. Including
the Rani's
classics.
TARDIS is very nice, isn't it? It's quite a fun
Oh,
job.
yes. Yeah.
Nice design,
fantastic,
and again, it's so the visuals. Again, it looks good, and it carries through from the.
Starts a trend of guest TARDISes for just a single story being better than the main one, the Doctor's TARDIS, which continues to this day, does it not? Yes, it does.
Yes. Well, apparently they did put it into storage, intending to use it in the Rani story the next year, which presumably would have been Yellow Fever and How to Cure
Yellow
It.
Fever,
But they put it in that same corner where they'd put the Doctor's wooden TARDIS and it warped. Because they still hadn't fixed the damp.
Yeah, the same corner that they managed to lose most of the stuff between... this would be a great anecdote if I could remember story titles. Mission to the Unknown and Dalek Master Plan.
So much for your arrogant superiority.
Seamless.
So tenuous.
Yeah, well, give me the brain fluid. I'm off.
Fortuitous would be a more appetite episode.
Yes.
Come on, I had to try that one. Someone say bingo and put me out of my misery.
Where's the one that I like the best? It'll be something devious and overcomplicated. He'd get dizzy walking in a straight line.
That's actually quite good, that one.
You see, that's quite good, yeah.
I wouldn't cut that out.
It's funny, it varies. And the baby T-Rex, it's funny, I remembered being quite impressed with that at the time. And I'm actually watching it now. Still, I kind of think, okay, the memory didn't cheat. I know, okay, it's a 1980s effect, but it's actually not bad for as far as you see it go. So far as it wouldn't look all that out of place in Walking with Dinosaurs or something like that, I guess. It's not embarrassing on the level of certain other puppet dinosaurs that we could mention.
It kind of helps. They cut off when it's still basic, little more than fetal, though,
yes,
doesn't it?
yeah.
Because you can't... It's a bit... But yes, you're right.
It always worries me that the embryo fluid is not all the way to the top. I know she's topping it up, but it just bothers me that the top of its head's drying out, and I'm worried that it's not okay. I nearly bought that T-Rex embryo about a year or two ago.
Wow, is it?
It's in okay condition.
What did they want for it?
I can't remember now, but it was obviously a bit too much for even one of my insane moments of self-indulgence. But I just thought, I like dinosaurs. I like Doctor Who. Yeah. I could own a dinosaur from Doctor Who. That was my
and
my
not
entire...
the ones from Invasion of the Dinosaurs.
Exactly.
Well, there we go. What's the conclusion?
And you were outbid by a mysterious man from Wigan.
Did they record these out of sequence? Because Colin's using Troughton's old coin tossing trick at one point in the tunnels. Is this after they've been together, or did he just?
Has anyone got a suntan?
Did Saywood remember it? I don't know. It seemed kind of interesting.
They switched the running order. I remember picking that up, but I don't know whether they switched it before or after filming.
Okay, what's another great observation from the team?
Because apparently JNT turned up on location, having just come back from Singapore, doing his holiday come location scout tax deductible. That was an excuse to make it a tax deductible jaunt So I don't know which one they actually filmed first. But there's a couple of connections, because there's also the whole TARDIS remote control thing. The
Yes,
Staten
you're
Nine.
absolutely right.
Which
Yeah.
the Rani has one, and then the second Doctor
Yes.
gets one in the next, and the Sixth Doctor comments, so, I've always wanted one of those.
Yeah.
Ever since...
Well, at least since the last
2 weeks
episode,
ago.
anyway, yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I've got one more note. I kept meaning to talk about the use of handheld camera on location, but I
Okay.
never found out. Well, no, I can tell this can go very badly. I should have crowbarred it in somewhere.
Yeah, well, crowbar it in now.
Did you notice that first-time director Sarah Helling uses a lot of handheld camera on location? It gives it an unusual feel, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, and I was wondering about an hour ago if that was part of the reason that the location feels a bit weird, because I don't know. Do we instinctively expect slow pans, static shots that are the best as slow pan on a dolly in a classical historical setting? And the use of a handheld camera makes it seem too modern. It makes it feel like it should be on videotape and it's a documentary. I was unsure about the worth of this observation, so I didn't bring it up when it would have fitted in.
No, I think that's actually an interesting point, Paul, because there is this kind of weird thing that if you're actually time travelling and you go into the past,
Yeah.
it's now, isn't it? It doesn't matter that it's a long time ago. It's now for you. So there's no reason why it should look any different from now.
No.
It's just we've got
And
it
it's
in
also
our
not in
heads.
black and white.
Oddly, yeah.
Well, so I'm told. So physicists tell me.
Yeah.
I've seen no proof.
I remember the precise moment the world changed from black and white to colour. It was just at the start of the Green Death. Anyway, sorry, we digress.
The Master kills a dog at one point. We could talk about that.
He
It
does!
does kill
The
a dog.
bastard.
It's
Yeah.
particularly brutish, isn't it?
Actually, we've got no proof that his tissue compression eliminator kills people. It may, all the shrunken people, they may just be asleep and dazed for a period of time, and then
Vanessa's just sleeping.
yeah, but they may get up and wander off and live happy lives. Planet of Fire, the Master's small and he's not dead, is he?
Yeah.
Good point.
So maybe there's a miniature dog around Bliss Hill somewhere.
So no one told Sarah Hellings how the tissue compression eliminator worked. Well, that was what they said. That's what they say in the production notes. Nobody told her how it works, and that's why
It's just a gun.
that's why people just vanish.
Oh,
But
crikey.
to my mind, hang on. Nobody told Pip and Jane how the tissue compression
Well,
eliminator
yeah.
works. Because surely that
Yeah.
will be in the script if you're going to see the miniature.
Maybe it's
Indeed.
because they thought the horror of a shrunken dog would be too much for the children in the audience to bear, so
Yes.
it just has to...
Should have turned it
vaporise.
into a chihuahua.
What a whimsical notion, John.
I mean, maybe they just disappear into the graph.
Yeah, he's turned up the setting to 11 or so 12, and now they
Yeah.
disappear to Ant-Man size.
Ah.
It feels quite stylish at times. Visually, I quite like the look of it. I mean, the sort of chocolate boxy feel aside of it. It felt nice and fresh. I thought Sarah Hellings made an impact on the series in it.
I should make it clear I understand why the handheld camera was there. It gives it a lot of energy, especially
Yeah,
in
yeah.
the action scenes. I mean, I
Indeed.
don't wish to complain. We've seen far too many statically directed action scenes, and
Yeah.
the endless Luddite business would have been even less bearable.
The studio stuff is often really sort of uncomfortable and stagey, and there's less of that in the film sequence. I wonder if she was more comfortable shooting and editing on film, because there's all kinds of moments where the blocking's really bad. It looks very stagey, where people move towards each other and then stop, and there's a bit where the Rani's trying to grab her box of maggots off the Master, and he's just there and she's sort of reaching for him.
Gav!
Hi.
I happen to know that Sarah Hellings joined the BBC as a film editor.
Oh, there you go.
So you've latched onto something there.
She was obviously much more comfortable with the handheld stuff, yeah.
That was the rumour.
Fanar.
How dare you?
You can't follow that
No.
Yes.
unless it's with the Crimson Horror.
Pip and Jane are in danger of actually having a theme, a consistently interesting theme, which is man versus nature. You mentioned Perry actually using some botany knowledge, and it seemed like they'd just been doing some research in their writing, but there's the comment about the hedgerows, and there's a few
Yeah.
other bits
Oh,
about
yes, yeah.
the importance of things and stuff.
Yeah.
And in conclusion, yes.
So are you then saying that's carried through into the sort of plant characters within the following season, the Trial of the Time Lord, the Vervoids?
That's an interesting point. Yeah, because they'd read some New Scientist, and that's where they got their brain juice idea, the sleeping stuff. I watched a Star Trek the other day, Night Terrors.
Oh, dear.
Exactly the same. Hey, don't you start slagging Star Trek off?
I watched it earlier, just before last time in Halifax. That's how I roll.
Yeah.
What? Night Terrors?
Eclectic isn't a word. That's Gatus again.
No, Next Generation episode, Night Terrors. People turn violent because they aren't getting enough REM sleep.
Right.
And I just happened to see that the other day, so it was curious that there was the same plot. But yeah, Pip and Jane reading New Scientist picked up this idea. I don't know quite what they're saying. I mean, it's just a sort of experimental idea about humans and plants all part, all not being of equal merit, but that the Rani's sort of, her morality is that she just sort of doesn't care. She's not evil. She just has a different holistic view on things.
Yeah.
What the catharsis of spurious morality? That's a wrong story, isn't it? Sorry, go on.
I was just thinking we should have talked about that a bit. There would have been, after I mentioned how the Master being so one-dimensional made her look different, and that would have been the time to talk about the amorality, which they do. They over-explain it a bit, but I mean, it's a nice idea, isn't it? I'm also going to talk about how she makes a really good impression in this one. That, although she's not grandstanding as a villain, the fact that she is often just getting on with her work is something distinctive in itself. And then her costume, and then when she sheds the disguise fully and she's strolling around in her silver costume, it's actually one of the least tasteless costumes we've seen in 1985, isn't it? It's quite striking. She's just camp enough. She's got that sort of ex-dynasty glamour, but it's not being overdone. Whereas, unfortunately, in Time of the Rani, both the costume and the makeup and everything's gone a bit too far that direction, hasn't it? But it's a very impressive debut, and it's a shame it wasn't followed through on.
Okay, so if we change gear then, next up we've got Crimson Horror, or The Crimson Horror? I guess so.
Yes.
By Mark Gatiss, directed by Saul Metzstein, which apparently is the 100th story of New Doctor Who. So, something told me earlier today.
The Stones of Blood of New Doctor Who.
Apparently.
Is there a deleted scene with a birthday cake? I said that in a Strax voice for some reason.
Yeah, with Mr. Sweet. So this is set in Yorkshire in 1893. I mean, I don't want to start carping from the very beginning, but I may have to point out that Yorkshire is the largest county in England. So describing something as being in Yorkshire isn't really narrowing it down all that much. I'm going to suggest it's perhaps the West Riding, if only because it feels like Sweetville is a sort of mashup of Bourneville and Saltaire is definitely in the West Riding. So I'm going to nail that as the probable location, sort of somewhere outside Bradford.
Well, that's a weight off my mind.
Yeah, I'm glad.
Diana Rigg came from Doncaster as well, didn't she? So, and famously
good knowledge.
Got to use her native accent.
Yeah, I mean, something good had to come out of Doncaster, didn't it? Sorry, that's my Yorkshire prejudice. It's the wrong side of the M62.
Oh, God, he's off the leash, listeners.
Yeah, and it's the other end of the 19th century. I mean, I remembered them both as being 19th century, but they are from opposite ends of it. It's a second outing, I think, for the Paternoster gang, or at least if they're in their Victorian setting. I suppose they've been in season 6 as well. So what struck me about this one, which I really quite enjoyed. I mean, so I'll say, like every other piece of Doctor Who that we've ever done on this, I'd almost completely forgotten it. I mean, I remembered it was set in Yorkshire, that was a sort of Industrial Revolution kind of setting to it, but I thought it was a very fun episode. But it's this interesting aspect to it that basically the Doctor and Clara have messed up badly this time, and if it wasn't for the fact that bloke in his dying moment stumbles in to the Doctor and coincidentally gets the image imprinted on his eye, which then Madame Hadastra happens to see. That's it for them. That's the end of Doctor Who, isn't it?
That is... It's a very good point, and you've also ruined it for me now. I'm just now furiously crossing out all the notes I've got about why this is so good. It's clearly trash of the lowest order.
No,
what a good point.
I think it's really good. It's just a point that occurred to me.
Just an observation. It's not in any way. I mean, it wouldn't be a better. I'm just thinking now. It wouldn't be in any way a better story if the Doctor had somehow cleverly engineered this man to, if this had been, I reckon if this had been Moffat, it would have been revealed that he had cleverly engineered to leave an imprint of his face on the retina of somebody who he knew would then come into contact. He would have engineered the entire thing. And
He would have travelled back in time at the end.
that would not in any way have been a better story, but it's just, you've got me thinking now about different approaches. I like it.
I love the structure.
There's something similar that comes up later that we might touch on where, again, it feels like, okay, if this had been, another writer would have taken a different choice and it's not necessarily better or worse.
I love the structure of this.
Yeah.
I think holding the Doctor back is really interesting. And then the non-linear way that it then catches you up is really good and fun. And I like how they play with the picture format and the sound quality and all that. I think it works really well. I think overall it might be my favourite Mark Gatiss story. Funnily enough, when I was coming back to watch this, I'd completely forgotten it was a Paternoster story.
Right.
I couldn't fill in the blank in my memory of what was missing, but I had little to no recollection of how it kicked off. I thought it was interesting that, we talked about Mark of the Rani being a shopping list, but this was again a story out of necessity because there were script delays with other things, so this had to form a production block with the Snowmen, and as a result, they basically made 2 stories for the price of 1. They retained the same cast and setting and director and set 2 Victorian stories and just shifted the position slightly.
I had no idea.
Yeah. So it wasn't conceived as a Dr. Light story, which it kind of feels like it might be heading towards.
I was going to ask that.
Yeah, no, it was a thing of necessity.
There's no more than a third of the story that he's out of, is it? At the most, so it wouldn't be much of a Doctor Light if it were.
And weirdly,
It's quite Clara Light as well.
Well, I was just going to say a big chunk of Jenny's stuff was originally Clara, or it became Clara, and then it was rewritten back as Jenny. The bit where ultimately Jenny is fighting the guys in the corridor in a leather catsuit that was an Emma Peel reference.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that was originally Clara in an Emma Peel catsuit, and then they switched it to Jenny. So
I'm glad it wasn't.
Not just because
Yes.
Clara ever show any fighting skills ever again. Or, sorry, not again, but I mean ever.
Ever.
No, I'm very glad it was Jenny.
On the subject of whether you remembered it or didn't remember, I remember almost all this, which is very unusual for New Who for me. And I think it might be, partly because I enjoyed it, partly because it's not overcomplicated. There isn't one extra twist or one gratuitous subplot that drags it down. It's all relevant and it's all good. So it delighted me as much tonight as it did at the time.
I think I only have one kind of nitpick, and it's only a fairly small one, and it's just that I felt the 2 plot points that both converged on being related to the venom or toxin or whatever it was called felt like there was a bit of sleight of hand there, because there was something slightly muddy about... Because Mark Gatiss wanted to do a story based on something else. Was it Carry On, Phil? People turned into mannequins. And so that's why you've got the bell jar preserved people.
Right.
Yeah, Carry On Screaming. That doesn't something like that happen? Yeah.
And they said that process was a byproduct of a watered down version of the toxin, which is why people were being dunked into the vats, although it doesn't look very watered down. The toxin is also going to be used to cause the apocalypse, to wipe everything out. And it just felt a little bit crowbarred that those 2 came from the same place.
Now you point that out. Yeah, it is a bit multi-purpose toxin, but I didn't spot it at the time, which...
Yeah, it's fine. It's okay. It's a minor grumble, but I have almost nothing else negative to say about this. I think it's great.
It's one of those stories where I really don't really care what the plot is, because I'm enjoying it so much, and the plot is just original. It makes just enough sense to get through it. And as you said, Gav, the pacing, the structure is one of the things I like most about it. I got a feeling that there's no flabby middle here. There's at least 1 or 2 Gatiss stories where it all slows down in the middle and some people get locked and stuck in a room and have a boring conversation and make some bad jokes. And we don't get any of that here, possibly because I don't think there is a middle. I think we always get like 2 act 1s followed by an act 3 because of
I was going to say.
I think the middle comes at the start.
Yes, well, that...
Because the Doctor starts with the Doctor locked in a room. So they just shunted the middle, put it at the start, said, don't worry about all that, it's already happened. And then it picks up the story with him escaping.
It's cheating, really, because we get 2 openers with 2 different... It starts off with a story about the Paternoster gang.
Yeah.
And then when our real heroes come in, we get a new burst of energy and a new kick up the arse. And I suppose the Paternoster gang do slightly fade away towards the end, which is a slight shame. But you then got 5 leads to deal with, so that's always going to happen. But there's just enough going on. As I say, there's not too much plot, and there aren't too many characters. And even though it's very, very silly, I find the 2 villains, as in inverted commas, very plausible, as well as very entertaining, watchable, and even moving at times. It's a very strange rollercoaster of emotions it takes me on. I feel very sorry for Rachel Sterling, even though Gatiss always goes for some pathos, doesn't it? It's always one character engineered to tug on the heartstrings. I think this is one of his best, which is interesting, given that it's one of the ne'er-do-wells rather than a more obviously sympathetic character.
I think Rachel Sterling is absolutely brilliant in this. I think she's... I'd remembered her in it, and I don't think I'd seen The Detectorists when I originally saw this. So it was quite nice having seen her in something else. I know she's been in a lot of other things, but I saw her in The Detectorist, and she really stood out in this. And one of the small grumble is there's the bit where she's pleading to her mother, and Rachel Sterling is acting her heart out. But unfortunately, Diana Rigg at that point also has some very deliberately cliched Machiavellian dialogue where she's saying, I must advance my plans, I must accelerate my plans. And Rachel Sterling's bawling her eyes out on the floor, giving it her absolute everything, and Diana Rigg's trying to do some Bond villain work as best she can.
Well, talking of Bond villain work, indeed, this is the plot is basically, it suddenly occurred to me, hang on, this is A Spy Who Loved Me / Moonraker, isn't it? It's the Stromberg Drax multi-purpose Bond plot of I'm going to cultivate my chosen race of perfect people, and then cause an apocalypse so they can repopulate the Earth.
We've had the chosen few who are going to repopulate the Earth before, but they've never given it a pseudo-religious justification for it. I mean, obviously they don't go too far with that because I guess you're still not allowed to, like you weren't in the 70s. Interesting, they push a bit further on that. And it is nice after Mark the Rani to have villains with a nice big plan, and by big plan I mean a nice big rocket, something big and visible and
just a plan would do.
Yeah, not a little test tube.
Yeah, I mean, I felt it was kind of deliberately humanist setting to some extent. I mean, it certainly has the overtones of the church and of the revivalist preacher, whatever. But it also felt like maybe he was backing away from that, and it was very much about sort of humanity creating something good on Earth rather than some kind of ethereal religion. Yeah,
there's no depth to that, is there? It's just a bit of gloss.
It's not that they're all going to ascend or anything. But it's interesting, and I was saying, the chapel Quakerism and stuff like that. And obviously, one of the models is all these, these model communities and things like that. As you say, Bourneville and so on, all these factory villages that were springing up. I think actually a bit earlier than this in reality. It's full of references, isn't it? I mean, and this is the thing that Gatiss is incredibly well read and knows an awful lot about this area in particular. So I was kind of picking up stuff all over the place. But the nice thing is that it feels to me, like it's a fairly rare occasion where he actually, carries all of that quite lightly. It doesn't hammer it over the head particularly. But I was thinking, okay, the Match Factory stuff, the famous Match Girl strike, and Fossey Jaw, if you remember which happened at the Bryant and May factory at Bow, because people who worked in the match factories got this dreadful disease called Fossey Jaw that was due to exposure to raw phosphorus, and the Match Girls strike of about the 1890s, I believe, was fairly pivotal, like celebrated moment of industrial action. And Sweetville, so far as I could see, it looks very much like the Bow match factory, which is still standing today, although it's very much luxury apartments. But I guess it's very much the kind of thing that a lot of these Victorian type factories would have looked like. So I thought that was interesting.
Is it deliberately, do you think, a folly version of it, though, in the sense that there is no factory? There's no thing that they're actually making. It's just a model community with a rocket in the middle of it that they're going, so it's a folly version of it.
Yeah. Oh, good point, yeah.
It always reminds me of Willy Wonka, that sort of trope. There's the line about nobody who goes and never comes out again, and that's the line that I always remember about Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. That
yes,
because that was the question I got wrong in the junior mastermind competition when I was 10. That's why I'm never going to forget. There's one thing I'm never going to forget about Willy bloody Wonka. Anyway,
I had Charlie and the Chocolate Factory down as another reference, and to be honest, with it being called Sweetville, I'd forgotten that it wasn't and especially with everyone coming out pink, I'd kind of forgotten that it wasn't meant to be a sweet factory, and much more definitely referencing Bourneville or anything like that.
There are some hints that it could have either he had more ideas than he needed, and he couldn't bear to let any of them go. There's quite a few half-developed ones in there, but it's not to his detriment for once.
I really like the reveal of the speakers.
The
speakers creating the factory noise. That's a neat extra, and it doesn't really go anywhere. It doesn't really need to. It's a great visual.
The other reveal where they allow Clara's clever bit, which she always has to have, is when she points out that there's a chimney that has no smoke coming out of it. So the uncanny element, and that's the sort of trick they use a lot in this genre. The little whodunit style clue.
The Sweet name comes from the fact that Dr. Matthew Sweet
is Matthew,
the progenitor of a lot of the ideas in this, or at least conversation with him. So Mr. Sweet is named after Matthew Sweet.
Okay.
It feels like a bit like one of his Jago and Lightfoots.
I'd tell you a really embarrassing story about when I met Matthew Sweet.
Yes, please.
I was at an event and was speaking to some friends, and he came up and joined the group. And I don't know what he'd just been doing, but he'd either seen himself in the mirror or he was watching himself on a monitor or something. But he said he'd become preoccupied with the way his ears looked. And I was in one of those moods. I just had a rush of blood and a moment of overconfidence. And in my ill-advised sense of humour, I looked at him and went, "Oh my God, yes, your ears, Jesus!" And I mean, I thought it was hilarious, but it went down about as well as you can expect. So yeah.
Are you hoping he's going to be listening? So there's going to be a backdoor apology.
I did subsequently apologise, and I think he.
Because he won't be.
Just
if this isn't going out on Radio 3, you won't be listening.
Yeah.
See, you might have got so far as to the fact that he completely forgotten about it.
Possibly. I mean,
just come back,
make an impression.
I also met Matthew Sweet at an event, and I almost mugged him because I thought you've got to take these opportunities when you see someone. I wanted to talk to him very briefly about the interview things off the Blu-rays, so I had a slightly over-enthusiastic discussion with him about that. Which he was so enamoured by the conversation that he faked a call from Paul Vanezis. I mean, of course, he may have had a call from Paul Vanezis, but he certainly claimed to have a call from Paul Vanezis and disappeared into the scenery. So yeah, we both had similar success there.
Well, no, never mind. I'm not going to.
Yes.
We had a nice conversation at the tavern once.
Okay.
Obviously, he was trying to flog me in an episode of Web of Fear 3, but I think he slipped into Vanezis on when he went to get the tube home. But
obviously, there's Ada's relationship to the Doctor. There's an obvious Frankenstein reference there, especially with her being blind. With the
old man,
the old man in the woods who befriends the monster. So that's
It is nice, isn't it? But it's feels a bit cruel considering that Moffat was always going on about how Matt Smith looked like a cross between an underwear model and Frankenstein.
Yes.
And they'd probably just about forgotten that by this point, and then they write it back in.
Yeah.
It could only be worse if they painted in green.
And there's a gag at the end where the girl says, she says the girl, how do you know he's an alien? And she says, because of the chin.
And of course, the Ada, the fact that she's called Ada is presumably referencing Ada Lovelace in passing, at least, who was Lord Bowen's daughter, which brings us all the way back to the Lone Cybermen and Villa Diodati, and so it's everything's connected.
One of the little literary references I picked up, the Red Leech itself is a reference, is a Sherlock Holmes reference. I forget which one. It's one of those off-screen adventures.
Oh,
the
right.
case of the Red Leech or something gets mentioned.
Oh, okay.
So he did meet Madame Vastra then.
It's a nice idea, actually, to make the parasite something from the time of the Silurians, so presumably a native.
Isn't that weird that for all the different reasons our esteemed organiser has picked these two episodes, that they both culminate in a dinosaur-based, chemical-infused extravaganza at the end? It's a weird little Victorian/Cretaceous fusion that crops up both for no readily good reason.
And I thought this was just the Gay Icons crossover episode.
Yeah.
Didn't anyone think that the sinister mortician, the bloke in the
yes,
in the mortuary, that's why I said mortician, he reminded me of a Gators
exactly,
character, Butcher from the League Gentlemen. He's doing the
Yes.
same mannerisms and everything.
Yeah.
I'm
same
sure
voice.
that's him
Right.
personified. Yeah.
I didn't notice that last time.
I spent more time than is healthy looking up and actually checking and trying to figure out who it was, and that he is a
What's the
genuine
character's name?
genuine actor. He's
Hilary Briss, of course.
He's Amos, so he is played by Graham Turner,
I wonder if-
apparently.
No.
Is the actor. And
I assume Gatiss didn't write it for himself and then get dissuaded. But
I
there's a
did
nice
wonder.
thought.
I kept looking and thinking, is it Gators in prosthetics? Because I was thinking, is it one of those makeup? Is it a League of Gentlemen style makeup job or something? Yeah, absolutely. And of course, he's got a talking of references again, we're throwing in our Doctor Who ones there. That's Talons of Wen Chiang, isn't it? The making all sick that.
Oh,
was,
yeah.
isn't it? I can't quite remember what his lines are, but it's clearly a nod in that direction. And I just realised that one with the. Because I was trying to think, where's the reference? That bit you were saying about with the I've been foolish, Mama, when Rachel Sterling's on her knees, and of course I suddenly realised that's from Ghostlight, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
At least
Yes, it's
I was watching it. I was thinking, hang on, where have I seen this before? Where am I picking out the reference? And that's poor what's her name when she just before she gets petrified.
I think in terms of Mr. Sweet, I'm talking about the little red crustacean version, not our mutual friend. The symbiotic nature of these two is novel as well, isn't it? We haven't seen a lot of that in Doctor Who. That's nicely done. It's not just ancient alien trying to take over the Earth or a mad human trying to remake the world in their image. It's a combination of both. This scheme probably wouldn't have happened if they hadn't both been joined at the well, I'm not quite sure where they were.
Joined at the nip.
Oh dear.
It's a wonderfully grotesque idea, isn't it? It's I'm surprised they.
It's technically falls into the category of having no. Well, apart from Strax, I suppose, you kind of eliminate the cast when you got the Doctor involved. It's got no alien elements, like a Silurian story, because the menace is all homegrown as far as we know. It's not an alien leechy parasite, is it? It's a Silurian era one that she said she found in the Thames.
Oh well, true. Yes, I used the word very loosely.
Oh, I wasn't contradicting you. What did you say?
Loose to the extent of being wrong.
Oh no, I wasn't.
I called it an alien earlier, just about 2 minutes ago. But I meant to say creature thing.
I mean, it is alien in the one sense. It's not an extraterrestrial, as far as we know.
Yes.
Like Thin Ice, I like the fact that the monster in Thin Ice does not turn out to be an alien either. It's just a thing floating around in the Thames.
Are you saying the Crimson Horror is
Yes,
essentially
it
a
is
pure
purely
historical in the vein of
Yeah.
the Highlanders and Black
And Mark
Orchid?
Rani.
Right. Just checking.
Although, so how has she invented a rocket?
Just hard work.
hard
Right.
work, and she's nothing.
She's a bit
Application.
She's just
She's
knuckled
a bit-
down to it.
She's a bit brighter than Werner von Braun or whatever.
Yeah, that
that's
is
all
one
right.
element that's kind of skimmed over, because I think this suggestion is that the symbiosis with Mr. Sweet elevates her a bit. But if he's
All right.
just a parasite, I'm not 100% confident of that. But if he's just an Earth parasite, then how did
He hasn't kept her young, has he? She's aged normally.
She might be 1,000 years old.
Yeah.
That's true.
She might be a
She could well
Silurian.
be.
She might be 65 million years old.
Rather than just 65.
And then the Jurassic gets mentioned, which is annoying.
Should they more precisely have been the Earth?
Earseed.
Don't get me started on when the Silurians are from. Ay, ay, ay. It's not
Well, I don't
down
think
that
you need to
road.
worry too much about the rocket, because I mean, I don't see any particular evidence for what's powering it, and you've obviously got plenty of rocketry was going on before, like with solid fuel rockets and various things that were being used in the 18th and 19th century, and it doesn't reach the upper atmosphere so far as we can figure out. It doesn't
It's
seem
just a
to
big
reach
firework.
space. If you want to, it's exactly a big firework. So
Yeah, thank you for that corrective, Josh.
and it kind of looks like that anyway. So
It's a good job we've got an astrologer on the team.
And the bloke who keeps fainting is also funny.
he
I
is.
was in
Yes.
such a good mood.
Yeah.
Even a joke as silly as that.
Yeah.
By the time he
Give that
appeared for one last go round his running gag, I was cheering.
Yeah.
The only joke I can't forgive and get past.
I know what you're going to say.
Go on.
Tom Tom.
What's? Yeah. It's.
Oh, is it the sat-nav joke?
Yeah.
I remembered that it was a sat-nav joke, and I was waiting for him to say that his name was some sort of weird analogy to sat-nav, and it wasn't.
Yeah. I
know.
That's all I'd remembered.
I have a love-hate relationship with that, because I love the idea that it's playing with the trope of meeting a historical person that goes on to do a great thing, which is the amazingly tired time travel / historical / whatever. And it's like, oh, it turns out to be Mr. Tom Tom. But I can't get on with the exact phrasing of the little boy. If he'd just given directions and it had
Yes.
not been the precise electronic
Yes.
direct, because that is so incongruous, it takes you out of what little suspension of disbelief you've got left.
It's a very fine balance, isn't it?
So if he'd just given directions and then been called Thomas, I'd have given it a pass.
It works for me, and the fact they don't hammer it home when he says Thomas. They don't go. They call me Tom Tom for short. Wah wah.
Yeah. It could have been. Yeah,
It could have been, and in the hands of other people, might have been.
I remembered something that I hadn't said a quarter of an hour ago. I think I've pointed out that some of Jenny's dialogue was rewritten as Clara and then rewritten back to Jenny again. But I mean, I had wondered why Jenny gets so much to do. It feels slightly odd at times that she's got so much more to do than Madame Vastra. And I was just assuming Gage had fallen in love with the character, because, I mean, when the Paternoster game came to big finish, I think almost all the writers instinctively wrote up Jenny, thinking, I know, I'll be the first person to give Jenny a big part, the lead, and we all did it, which was kind of inevitable. And having mentioned Big Finish, I was slightly embarrassed when we got to Mr. Sweet, and I realised that's basically what I'd ripped off when I'd created another sort of race of small crustaceans that were the scourge of Silurian era Earth, and thought, what a great original idea. But
when did you set your Silurian
nobody
era?
warned me that this was potential. Oh, me personally, I made it 65 million and 12 years, just for plot reasons.
It was a big ecosystem. There's enough. There's room for a couple of different parasitic razors and things.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I also destroyed Atlantis for the fourth time in the same story.
Why not?
No, I didn't. Well, the Crimson Horror. Was the link just supposed to be the vaguely 19th century northern industrial feel, or had you spotted that the mark of the Rani is indeed a kind of crimson hue? Both stories' titles come from a red-hued affliction.
Skin thing. Very good.
I'll leave the listener to decide whether that was indeed central to the connection or simply a very nice accretion. Yeah.
Well, there we are then. I should have saved that till the end if that wasn't where we were heading with this entire thing. They've probably all been screaming at us throughout the entire podcast. Apparently, that's what they do.
They scream for some reason, anyway.
Yeah.
The other thing I was going to bring up that was
Yeah.
this is a request for illumination as much as anything. When the Doctor gets the whole plan out of Mrs. Gillyflower and she's slagging off Ada, and then Ada comes around the corner. Now we don't get any indication that we don't know that she's there beforehand. And I don't think we get any indication that this is the Doctor deliberately doing that.
It is signposted slightly. He said his final words in the preceding scene to Ada are, "Come with me, there's something you need to know." So
Right, okay, it is.
Because I was conscious of that, I think, being ADR, and wondering, I was only paying attention because I was wondering to myself whether that had been rewritten, or he'd originally said that's something you need to see and they thought twice about it, or I don't know. But that was playing on my mind, and then so when that scene then started, I thought, he is doing it for her benefit.
That's all the more interesting if it was ADR, because that was the thing that I was going to pick up on earlier about writing choices and things like that, that in some ways someone might have written that as really leaning into that the Doctor is being consciously cruel to Ada in terms of making her hear this stuff. Or
I think he was
not.
doing it to turn, to make sure she turned against her mother. But I'm always suspicious of any lines that are particularly good audio quality, but also when it's a cutaway shot to an inanimate object and you don't see the actor's lips. And that was a case of, there's something you need to see. No, there was something you need to know, he said. And I thought, that sounds like a late edition.
Constantly boring Mrs. Morris with nice screams of, "That was ADR!"
Yeah.
God, you can imagine. I'll give the evening's flyby.
Okay, so I wonder whether they started with the intention of with it being a coincidental thing and then decided to tighten it up.
So I guess I failed to mention it during our long discussion about Mark of the Rani, but nobody ever tells anybody what's happened to Luke. I mean, basically, at the end of the story, the Master and the Rani go on their way, and the Doctor and Peri go on their way, and they're the only people who have the clue what's happened to Luke. So his dad's going to wonder, George Stevenson's going to be pining for him as well. Although they will say he was reeked odd a few hours before he disappeared. But no one's ever going to know.
They won't say he's a bit odd because apparently nobody noticed, despite the fact he started doing strange villain acting.
Yeah.
And there's no suggestion that he's not going to live on. Well, if Rani explicitly says he'll live on for several times a human lifespan. So will he just be tickling people, random passers-by, scallivant through the copse?
I like the idea that the Doctor just departing just says cryptic things that, like the Rani did for no reason. He's out in the dell, but he's a changed man. Bye.
Well,
the famous tickling tree of Redfern Dell.
It's improved since Vengeance on Varos. He doesn't make any terrible, tasteless puns, does he?
Yeah.
Sub Austin Powers style.
His bark was worse than his bite.
Just leave him alone.
Yeah.
He's branched out. No, stop. I hate puns. Why am I?
Yeah.
Stop encouraging me. You didn't.
You're a sap.
It's a fair coppice.
You twigged. Oh, that was good. That's worth the wait.
Yeah. But at least we don't get that here. There's no hanging issues for any of the remaining characters at the end.
Nope.
I was trying to work out if that was a tree pun. It wasn't, was it?
We were waiting for
he's
the pun.
he's being serious. He's trying to drag us back on course.
No, I'm not. No, not especially.
Yeah, my general impression was just, why can't Gatiss always write like this for Doctor Who? Because he's very good at most other things he writes. I thoroughly enjoy, really, but it's often the Doctor Who that feels like it falls short, and this one is pretty damn perfect, really.
Well, we're left with the nasty possibility that he's only any good when Dr. Matthew Sweet gives him all the ideas. But I'm not going to believe that was the case. I think this is like a stick of Blackwall Rock with Gatiss written through it. I'm very fond of it.
Yeah, I don't think that can be the case because Matthew Sweet wouldn't have been responsible for the form of it and the formal invention of it and so on that we get in this that we don't usually get.
All the things that are brilliant about this appear in all Gatiss's other stories, but they're often soda things that drag them down, and this somehow he just gets it bang on this time. Well, nobody's perfect.
Well, he's got a very talented director helping him and a good cast. I mean, there's lots of things that are working for this.
I think that the directing is excellent. I think that it's beautifully shot. And one of the things I noticed was the use of colour. It's red and green throughout. So obviously the red toxin and Mr. Sweet is red. And Mr. Sweet's innards are also red when he gets splatted. The villain headquarters are red walled and red carpeted. But you've also got green counterbalancing that all the way through. They've ramped up the saturation of the green in the streets, and there's a green fence by the TARDIS, and Ada's costume is green at the end. And the Doctor's cured in the magical chamber with the sonic screwdriver. It's a green light. And I just like that, the red-green palette throughout. It's beautifully shot. Victorian landscape just looks really nice. It feels really lavish. It feels 10 times more Victorian than Mark of the Rani, I think, weirdly. But then it is kind of all dialed up.
I guess this is deliberately heightened, isn't it? So maybe that's helping. So you're not expecting it to be entirely authentic, and it delivers perfectly for what it is.
It's interesting that the two aspects of the Victorian period are great poverty and great wealth through industry, and Mark of the Rani and Crimson Horror reflect each end. Although you've got the sort of the squalid factory component of Crimson Horror, it's a lush Victorian world, especially starting with a Paternoster's home inside Mrs. What's-her-name's lair is all very nicely done, and you've got the beautiful Victorian church, so you get the plush side. Yeah,
and even the lower characters are sort of almost middle class, aren't they? I mean, the whole thing about those model villages is that nobody's living in squalor. It's kind of bringing everybody up a bit, isn't it?
I wonder if that's a slight misstep in... I mean, it doesn't matter, because ultimately we got what we got, but... Gatiss conceived this out of oppressive factory conditions. I think that was the embryonic notion, and you don't get the oppressed worker vibe because it, like you say, it all comes out as middle class.
The thing is, as soon as you mentioned that, I start imagining a version of this where there is a subplot about oppressed workers, and that's where the pathos is. The pathos is transferred from Ada to a character who's just there purely to be the subject of our pity, and then it's flawed. Like for me, stories like The Idiot's Lantern are, or so the other efforts where I just feel that are not particularly successful.
Yeah, I mean the whole street urchin thing comes out in that one with Dervla Kirwan.
Next Doctor.
Yeah, so I mean we've had that, I suppose, and so maybe this is a bit different.
Yeah, and I guess the thing is, where would you put oppressed factory workers when you have a factory that, when the setup is that the factory doesn't do anything?
I think in 45 minutes, I'm glad he didn't go down that route. I think that's one of the reasons why it works so well for me. Which is not to say that in principle it's not a good idea, and if you had time to do it justice, could have been a very powerful sideline. But in terms of what we got, maybe he was inspired by the Paternoster gang, as who wouldn't be.
As a kind of aside for that whole model village thing, I was reading the biography of Jacqueline Hill. She started her acting career in the Bourneville factory, working for Cadbury's.
Good Lord.
In a sort of late teens, early 20s, something like that. And so it was through that kind of am-dram stuff that she then became involved in acting. So I guess even as late as the 1950s, that kind of setup was still helping to elevate people from a sort of humdrum existence to something a bit more. The opening sequence, I'd forgotten that existed as well. I mean, I guess it's only for this second half of Series 7, isn't it, that they had that particular bit with the Wibbly Wobbly and Matt Smith and a slightly different version of the theme. But it sort of caught me by surprise because I'd forgotten it, along with everything else.
While we're just mentioning random things, I noticed that in the trailer for the next week's episode, it privileges a shot of the Doctor having been turned into a Cyberman, looming forward and screaming at the in exactly the same way as we've just seen him do, having turned into Crimson Horror. I thought that's a bit careless to put those two stories next to each other. And then, of course, Gav has pointed out that they moved this one as far away from the snowmen as possible, which is almost to the other end of the season, so maybe that's how it happened. One thing, when I think of New Who, I think of endless interviews in Doctor Who magazine where they explain how they carefully move stories around because they noticed that... I remember, was it 1 year 2 stories had torches in, so they moved them to opposite end of the season because you couldn't possibly The viewers would be up in arms if two stories had torches in, and yet here we get. Anyway, never mind.
Yeah.
It is not a criticism, just an observation.
This episode was underrunning, so they were desperately looking for bits and bobs to fill it with. So that end scene with the, Clara goes home, meets with the kids, that was relocated from Journey to the Centre of the TARDIS and shunted in to that episode. And then there were extra scenes with the Paternoster gang written, the one in the coach and the one looking at the poster, I think, and they're just filler to bring it up
not
to
the
full-time.
not the sat-nav joke. It was always there from the beginning. That was in the original pitch.
The whole episode is based around the sat-nav joke, and it expanded outwards from there.
It's nice because it doesn't overplay the sort of Strax tropes, as it were.
Yeah.
The boy girl confusion and stuff like that. So I think we get it once, but we don't dwell on it, and it just it uses him well to, we have a series of equally amusing gags, like the stuff with the horse.
There's always a lot of resentment in the Doctor Who community about, through Strax mainly, the Sontarans have become a joke, and it doesn't worry me too much. And Lynx has some quite fun and funny lines, and I think he sometimes he's sort of being kind of knowingly ignorant. Lynx, I mean, in the same way. I mean, I'm not saying Strax is knowingly ignorant, but I mean, it doesn't feel a million miles away when, like when Lynx says your system of breeding is inefficient and you should change it. And these kind of, I mean, it's naivety rather than stupidity. Yeah, I think Strax is as close to Lynx, the original Sontaran, as we've had. I mean, it's like the two Doctors Sontarans I find harder to recognise.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not literally, because they're completely different. You know what I mean? So yeah, Strax doesn't bother me, but
no.
But there's there's a lot of comments like, I can't wait for the Sontarans to come back and be a threat and not a laughingstock again, and sentiments to that effect. It doesn't worry me.
But then they were entirely dreamt up as being a satirical, and it was a satirical idea in the first place, really, weren't they? So. And you get that in Lynx, and to some extent with Style, maybe. And then, it just gets forgotten about, and they're just another warmongering race, but they leave out the satire.
It's not playing it for laughs in The Time Warrior, but they're fun scenes with him and Iron Gron. There's all kinds of fun bits. I really like The Time Warrior. I think it's underrated. And I think Strax is an acceptable offshoot of that. It's fine.
Any other thoughts about the Crimson Horror before we bring this one juddering to a halt?
Just that I really liked the Dr. Clara relationship at this point, and I remember what a breath of fresh air she was. I mean, okay, we had in this sort of impossible girl phase. I'd kind of forgotten about this because I kind of think about Clara in the series 8 and 9 iterations instead. And I thought, oh yeah, she was a breath of fresh air. I'm not to say anything against Karen and Arthur, Amy and Rory particularly, but yeah, it was a nice, interesting, fun relationship they had going on there.
What struck me when I came to watch this today and find it on iPlayer, scrolling backwards through time, and I couldn't immediately remember what season it is, because it's like 4 years in a row, I'm not great at place. But when I was looking at the later Clara seasons, and I thought, oh, it's definitely not that season, because as soon as I saw the row of thumbnails, I just thought, they're all so grim. And the Crimson Horror, I remember being fun. And so I scrolled up and thought, it's not that season, because that's slightly less grim, but it's still not fun. And then I finally came to the right season. I thought, oh, that's the fun season where I didn't feel miserable at the end of each episode, and there it is. So yeah, it was a point I was fully on board with the new series, and it was great to revisit it.
And kind of linked to that, I'm contractually obliged to say that Matt Smith is the best thing in this, the best of many good things, as I do every time we watch a Matt Smith. He's just astonishing, and we didn't know when we were well off. Unless, of course, we did know when we were well off. But you know what I mean, it's the turn of phrase. He's amazing. He gets the best out of every single line.
Yeah.
Bring him back to our screens.
I thought that exact thing. I mean, like you say, he does it throughout, but there's one line in particular where it's just a throwaway. He says, she's a lizard. And you just thought, how can you make that be that good. There's not enough meat in that to be that good a line. There you go.
I think he does that bit where the Doctor switches from dark to light, or light to dark on a sixpence much better than any others. Some people, I mean, I don't wish to pick him up by criticising other Doctors, but he does it so lightly, with just a sort of slight narrowing the eyes, and whereas some of the other Doctors have to change their entire physicality and voice to get that across, and comparatively it's a bit heavy-handed. Well, not long to the 60th anniversary and we'll see him again, won't we? Won't we, please?
Surely. Yes, and I suppose it's also a return to the era of the run-up to the 50th, and more Doctor Who than ever before.
Oh dear, that's a
now.
We never did get to the bottom of that, did we? And this is not the place to start.
Not now, no.
No, never mind.
So,
unlike the Snowman, there are no clues to return to missing episodes hidden in here. Although no doubt some people on the forums did some numerology based.
Yeah. Crimson. Oh, no. So essentially what we've got here are two stories set in the 19th century involving some kind of chemical reaction on people that kind of transforms their behaviour. We've got strong women who are sort of single-minded in their activity to get what they want, I guess, at kind of whatever the cost. And I suppose one of the stories is a bit more fun than the other, but they both have their light moments.
And you've got a third act that links back to the Cretaceous period for no particular good reason in each one.
And the colour red.
And the colour red.
FF0000.
Splendid. Okay, well, look, I mean, in that which case, what's left is to thank you all for very pleasant chat through these two stories and for your company. And I'm sure, I mean, we have. It's fair to say, listeners, we've got a few other combinations up our sleeves, which we'll probably have a trawl through and work out which is the best one to go with next. But yeah, so we'll be with you in a few weeks' time, depending on how long it takes me to edit this and get it out, and we'll look forward to seeing you then, or you can hear you hearing us, I suppose.
It's an acceptable form of speech to say we'll see you then.
Yeah.
I don't always put my foot through the TV when they say it on television.
I suppose. Is there anything that any of you would wish to, of your work you'd wish to promote before we put this to bed?
Gav, try and sell me your book, because I still need to be persuaded.
I can't. I just love the idea of finishing a podcast with the host not being able to work out whether he can see or hear his listeners, or they can see or hear him. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was better. I thought it was funnier than ending on a hex value, although that was a bold move, Paul. So buy my book.
Ring. Oh, yeah, okay. Buy Gav's book, everyone.
Yep,
available at all good places.
Yeah.
And I might get an episode of Terry Nation Army out next week as well.
Ooh,
that's not inconceivable.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the only problem with plugging that here is that anyone who listens to this will already be watching that anyway. And anyone who's watching, most people watching that won't be listening to this. But, I mean, it's a nice thought, isn't it?
I mean, there's the Missing Episode podcast, which has just returned with Gav and I discussing, and obviously Tim discussing Dalek's Master Plan.
Ooh, has it?
Have a listen to that.
Okay, this is news to me.
Well, it's fairly current as I speak.
Yes.
Brilliant.
Yeah. And it is absolutely excellent, but I also feel that it's probably got a gazillion listeners already compared to this humble effort.
Yeah, we're a small circle in the middle of in the middle of their Venn diagram, aren't we?
Indeed. But yes, no, I would wholeheartedly recommend that to anyone. Good.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I will be appearing on various national public radios across the US.
Oh, yes, you just...
Yes, yeah, tell us about that.
I'm doing a audio publicity tour, as it were, for my book. So I'll be appearing on various forms of NPR across the US over the next couple of weeks or so. Weirdly enough,
Is that this book here?
Fantastic.
if any of you listen to Leonard Lopate at Large, then yeah, I'm coming up on there tomorrow.
Excellent. Well, yeah, we also heartily recommend Giles's book. So,
Giles Breaks America.
Hey, America breaks Giles, more like. Who was that?
This is tangentially. Does anyone know? Is anyone familiar with When the Boat Comes In? Because I desperately wanted.
Yes,
suggest
of course, and that was
would have been
another
an
thing.
influence, but I've never seen it. So,
well, I have been in the room when it was on,
Pretty-
but I haven't said I've actually watched it.
I'm familiar with it as an Alan Partridge quote and nothing more.
When the boat comes in, yeah.
I'm pretty
okay,
sure.
we'll cut that
that's-
entire bit out then.
Yeah.
My initial instincts not to mention it were right.
Yeah.
Oh, I just did an Anthony Ainley chuckle. I didn't know.
So the best I can do with that, Richard, since I know you were starting, is Chrono R. Morris. Is the best anagram I can find for Crimson Horror. Well, at least the best one with the best one with Morris in it, at any rate.
Ooh.
So hang on, which one's story R?
It's not a missing one, is it?
Is it not?
It's,
Chase? No, it's
Yeah.
not one.
yes.
No, what is it?
Q's the Space Museum, Mars a Chase.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, blimey!
okay.
I never get them right.
Time
Right.
Meddler, yeah.
Ah, you geeks.
My favourite.
Mm.
Ooh.
I mean,
Chrono
I should have been a bit
Chrono
snappy
Chase
with it on
Morris. There we go.
Yeah.
You're
It's all-
editing it, you
everything's
can be as snappy
connected.
as you like.
Well, never a truer word spoken.
There you go.